So from this point on, it's all, going to live forever. So I'm Deacon John. Go ahead.
I'm Alex. I'm Nina.
Barbara.
John.
Anna.
Nick.
Susie.
Rob.
Perfect. All right. Introductions are out of the way. So I will, at the end, I'll tell you about why I chose St. John as my patron saint. And because there's no reason to get too deep into that at the moment. So what I'm going to do is disconnect this one and put it in here. So hopefully that will work. Oh no. What am I going to do?
You're gonna plug it.
I'm going to have to unplug it. Yeah, we'll try it. We'll try it that way.
Through the speaker, your speaker. Huh?
Yeah, what I'm concerned about is the feedback through Zoom. That's what I'm concerned about. We'll see. And if we get feedback, we'll go from there. So here's a little video. Yeah, I'm afraid that we're going to get some feedback, but we'll see how it works. Okay. It kind of gives just an overview of his life, okay, from his birth to death, and one of those squiggly little drawing on the screen kind of things. So I think it gets the point across. So let's see how this works.
Year was 1896, and a little boy named Michael was born. Michael was an excellent student.
All right. See, that's the problem.
Okay.
So
Can you turn your volume off on the computer?
it won't go through. So we're gonna skip it. So that's it. I'm not gonna torment ourselves with that because that's just gonna make us crazy. Okay. So I'll get right to it. So the early years, I kind of broke this down in terms of kind of his early years, kind of how he got into how he became a priest and ultimately a bishop, and then a little bit about his life in those years, and then ultimately his repose. So St. John, he was born July 2nd of 1896, and that is on the new calendar. When you research St. John, you'll find a variety of writings from all over the world, and so some of them will be both calendar dates, some will be new calendar dates, some will combine them. So you'll see a mix of that in here.
So when you say new calendar, do you mean the Julian calendar as opposed to the Gregorian as opposed to the Julian?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
We're on the old one.
We're on the new one.
We're on the new one.
We're on the new one. We're on the new calendar,
We're on the
except for Pascha.
except for Pascha.
See, isn't that fun, right? So that's where it gets that's where it gets a little bit confusing. But ultimately, if you want to know, so this year we will have liturgy on St. John's Day, birthday. Okay, which happens every however many years, 6 years, right? Yes. So he was born. I'm not going to try to pronounce all the names, all the Russian names, because I do horribly at that.
Nina can help.
Yeah.
Sweet.
There you go. Perfect. Right? Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
it.
And Father Elias always corrects me in the back. He says, Deacon John, you might want to pronounce it this way. Like, well, I want to just get through that litany more than anything else. But in what is now northeastern Ukraine. Okay. So from 1907 to 1914, he attended a military school. And then he went on to university and became a lawyer. So he was a lawyer. And interesting, during some of that time too, he sold newspapers to make a living.
Everybody did that.
Everybody did that, right? Not now, but but then, right? Everybody sold newspapers, right? That's how they worked their way through school. And now the other thing about him too is that his family was part of the royal family. Okay, so they were aristocrats. And actually he has some in his lineage there is another saint and famous bishop in Russian history, like 50 years prior, I think is what it was.
Did he own a real estate agent?
Yeah. Yeah. You never know, right? So in 1921 his family fled to Yugoslavia during the Civil War, the Russian War, Civil War. In 1925, he received his degree in theology from the University of Belgrade. Some of the stories about his life is that you'll read some things and they'll say that I love how they write all these things. He was a sickly child, that's how they describe him, right? But he was very thin and frail. his parents were very pious Orthodox Christians. And so he, from a very early age, was committed to attending liturgies and all the services. He had a nanny, or I guess I wouldn't call them a nanny. Governess,
Yeah.
who was French, the story is that she was so impressed with this young boy's commitment to prayer that she ultimately converted to Orthodoxy. Okay. So even from that early age, he was very committed to his faith. This is a picture of him that I found. This is probably somewhere in the time that he was working on his theology degree. Maybe some of these things are not very well dated, and as you can imagine, it's interesting finding photo documentation is so hard going back into the 30s and 40s especially. So tonsure and ordination. He was tonsured in 1926, and this date, some say 1925, some say 26. So again, it's in the sources are. It's interesting. There's a lot of sources that are domestic from U.S. sources, and there's a lot from in Russia. So there's this kind of mix of things, and then you'll also find some things in China as well, documenting his life. He became a diaconate. He was ordained to the diaconate in the same year, and then ultimately became a priest and became a priest. So once he became entered the diaconate, he was a hierodeacon because he was a monastic.
So he'd probably done like the day afterward, first and the second one, because
Yes,
Paul and Anthony was in town.
probably. Yeah, exactly.
Kinda
Right.
like
Yeah,
Michael.
exactly. Well, that's the reality. That's the reality of it. As you talk to many people, they'll tell you that their time in the diaconate was typically rather short. And then on June 3rd, 1934, and again, and I couldn't tell you if that's new calendar or old calendar because it wasn't clarified. Hieromonk John Maximovich, at the age of 38, was ordained to the Holy Episcopate by Metropolitan Anthony, and he objected to his order. He did not want to be a bishop, and he said because he had a speech impediment, so he apparently stuttered. Okay? So, and the Metropolitan told him it doesn't matter, you'll be fine. Right. So it's interesting. And he went to, and when he was summoned by the Metropolitan, he was expressing to people, and you'd see that in the video, is that he was on the bus and he was expressing to this lady that he was very concerned about this ordination that was coming up, and that it was his, So he was very humble, very, very humble man, to say the least. He was, through some of his service, he was an educator. He, from the time that he ended his pastoral role. So when he was a priest or hieromonk is really what it be. He served at a Serbian high school. He also served, as it says, divine services at the request of the Greeks and Macedonians in Greek language. He was also very fluent in a variety of languages. Go ahead. Louder. I'm sorry. I will do my best.
Thank you.
Okay. Louder. I'm looking down. I apologize.
So forgive me.
No, that's a no.
Was it the Serbian Orthodox Church that he was ordained? No.
He was ordained in the Russian,
Okay.
right? Yes. And I can't tell if it was ROCOR or because the Russians split.
Yeah.
Right. And my intention was not to get into all the things that happen inside the Russian church, but ultimately he became a bishop. As a bishop, he was in ROCOR.
Okay.
That's what it was. And he ultimately was the leader of ROCOR for a period of time. And he also worked during the time that he was at the school. He also worked as a tutor and religious teacher. So he was very much an educator. And the interesting thing about it is that his writings are very hard to find. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents, and most of that is maintained up in Alaska at St. Herman's. Okay? So he helped to establish a monastery, and then they maintain those records. I've got one little book of his he was, and this one, the introduction is by Sarah from Rose. Okay, so Sarah from all familiar with Sarah from Rose. And he is so Father Seraphim, or he was a monk, so a higher monk. He was in California, and he met one of the children that was in that St. John brought over from China. One of the orphans was in the children's home that they had in San Francisco. Introduced Father Seraphim Rose to St. John, and St. John took him on as a disciple. And then Seraphim Rose, you'll find in a lot of contemporary writings, a lot of our young people that are joining the church know about Seraphim Rose, because he has you can find lots of YouTubes about him and from him. So, and he has Father Seraphim has a really interesting way of writing, because he writes in the third person, right? So it's a really kind of a fascinating, some of his writing's fascinating.
Like the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. But this book is all about the Theotokos, and St. John in his writing, he's very plain and very simple. So he's easy to understand, and he reflects everything back to the services of the church and to the fathers. So he is, throughout his life, it's said that he never missed a day serving some sort of service at church, and he communed every day. Okay? So that's a couple little things about him. And this is about the only book. There's one book about his life that I found. It was like $95. So I assume that it's probably out of print. And it's just, so there's just not a lot of stuff put together in one place. 1929. In this case, they said he moved to a seminary in the Serbian Orthodox Church, and he remained there till 1934 when he was ordained Bishop John. Okay. And you'll find in history a lot of, especially in the old Soviet countries, you'd find a lot of movement back and forth between the different jurisdictions. So it was not abnormal at all for that to happen. This is the most probably accurate picture that I can find of him.
Is that an autograph picture of him?
That's got, I don't know what it says on there, to be honest. It's so hard to read.
Can you?
It could very well be. It could very well be. I looked at, but I'm not sure. Yeah, you can't. Does it? Yeah, I don't.
I like my definition.
There you go. Yeah,
It's worth money.
there you go. So sure, it's available online, so it's not worth that much. Anyway. What is that? John. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe
I
it's
think
just.
it's his last name.
His last name, that's what it looks like.
I think if it says Shanghai ski, maybe it's referring to the Shanghai, China.
Shanghai, yeah.
Oh.
And that could be, and again, some of these things are really hard to identify where they were taken. But he was ordained and then moved very quickly to Shanghai as the Bishop of Shanghai. So December 4th, 1934, St. John arrived in Shanghai through Beijing, and his first day there was on the feast of the entrance of the Theotokos to the temple. And you'll find this common thread with the Theotokos throughout his whole life. There were some 50,000 Russian refugees in the city and the surrounding areas, and they were all exiled, so they had no home. Right? They escaped Russia, and so John was really looking at serving them. There was lots of different jurisdictions and denominational differences going on in Shanghai at the time. And so he managed to be able to pull those people together. You'll find that in most of the stories of him talk deeply about, there's two things. One, say he appeared really grumpy. Okay. And he, but when you look at his life, you'll find that he never had a bed in his room, his cell. And so because he led a monastic life, right? So he never ate in the morning. Okay? He would commune before he ate. He never rarely slept. He slept like they say he would sleep in like 10 to 15 minute spurts. Oftentimes it'd be like 15 minutes at his table. Somebody would walk in, he'd get up and start he'd sit right up and have a conversation with him.
Might be why he was grumpy.
Might be why he appeared grumpy. But he also was because he ate very little, he was very thin. And if you think of most of the images that you have of the monks, most of them are very small, right? They're small and they're very thin. And he was small to begin with. He was short. He was shorter than me. Right? So he's a short man. But he managed to unite people. And he united people because of the way he lived. Right? He finished the large cathedral that was dedicated to the Surety of Sinners icon of the Mother of God. And I'll show you a picture of what that looks like.
This is my ignorance. I had no idea that there was an Orthodox anything in China.
China had very good Orthodox presence until the communists destroyed it. Right. So that was it was the Russians that brought Orthodoxy to China.
Sure.
Right. And then
Through exile, huh?
through exile. Yeah, through exile. And there were some Chinese bishops. So there was a very good presence. But then what happened when
Nothing exists now, probably.
no.
Yeah.
They other than in the communities for like the expatriates, the foreigners that come in,
Yeah.
that work. Right. There is an Orthodox church, their presence in Shanghai, in that community, but not outside of the general public. The only religion that the Chinese government recognizes is the Catholic faith. But they monitor everything that goes on there. Yeah, so it's kind of scary that way. Says he was intensely active, constantly praying and serving the daily cycle of services and visiting the sick with holy gifts. So they also say that he rarely wore shoes. And that part of his humbleness was the idea that he didn't want to live better than the people that he was serving. And there's one story that I've got a couple stories that I'll share with you, but one is there was because of his speech impediment, he hired a speech coach, and she became very ill, was in the hospital. And because of all the conflict that was going on at the time, they would lock up the hospital at night so nobody could get in. And every time he saw her, he would give her, they say $20. So whatever that was, however that equated into Chinese money. And so she was hurt in a lot of pain and they felt that she would die. So she was praying to him and asking for him to be able to come to see her. And they said he couldn't because at that time the Japanese and the Chinese were fighting. And so she had this vision that he was with her in the middle of the night. And she, the next day, was miraculously healed. They of course told her there's no way that this guy was there. And her roommate, there was all big rooms, right? So the person next to her said, "Oh no, I saw this man." And they found a $20 bill under her pillow.
Wow.
Okay. So there was lots of those kinds of experiences with St. John.
So the holy gifts, he was healing people? Is that
Yes.
what you're saying?
Yeah. Two pictures of this one. I found a series of photos that came from, it's like the Russians in Exile Society or something to that effect. And they actually had it from the laying of the cornerstone to the completion of the cathedral.
In China.
In China. Yeah. So that is in China.
Is that church still there?
I do not know for sure. I believe it is and turned into something else, of course, right? Is when the government took over. And then this, I think, was kind of a little bit more modern. This was dated, I think, in like 45.
Look at the Jeep.
Yeah, the Jeep. And and Shanghai was occupied, right? It was under Japanese occupation. You know, so when he got there, there would have been British, right? And lots of Western presence that way. And then ultimately when the Japanese invaded China, you know, they took over Shanghai. And then later, the Chinese communists came in, and then that's when the Russians had to leave. So a little bit more. St. John went around gathering abandoned children. That was one of his, you know, most memorable things about St. John, is that in addition to his work and his work at we would consider typical pastoral work, he started an orphanage in China dedicated to Saint Tikhon.
Maybe
And
we know now why you picked this man.
that might have an influence on it, right?
Did China have a lot of people as a percentage of the population of the world back then? Like
Did
right
what?
now, I think like India is number
Sure.
one, China is number two.
Yeah. Well, China would have been still have a huge population just because of its size, right?
Right, so as a percentage still.
Yeah, I would imagine that. Yeah. And they say that what's pretty consistent is that the orphanage started with 8 children and then finished they say that it finished with 3,500. Where they put them, I do not know, or how they dealt with all that. One of my this is, I think you'll find this touching. He one day and I won't read it word for word, but I'll summarize this. This is the story of how he would go in the slums of Shanghai, and the stories are that there were cases in which dogs would devour baby girls who were thrown into the garbage cans.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so the history of China with their girls was pretty, even then was still happening, right? And then went on to say that when the newspapers announced this, Archbishop John told his caregiver, the head of there's a woman that the matron of the orphanage, to go and buy 2 bottles of Chinese vodka. Of course, this woman was horrified that this man of God would tell her to get vodka. And then he went along with her and went out into the city at night, and he would walk the back alleys looking for babies. And in this particular one, there was a man, and he was drunk, and he heard a baby. St. John heard a baby and asked the man where the baby was, and he handed him a bottle of liquor and the baby, and he revealed where the baby was in a garbage can. And that was, so I guess my perspective on it is that he was realistic enough to understand that there were some things that were more important than others, right? And saving those children were more important than anything. And he used whatever means he could. And there was another story of him going into for lack of a better word, a house of prostitution to save children from their parents that were the mothers that they really had no other choice, really. And they were mostly Russian women. And he saved many of those kids out of those circumstances. Says that he's, you know, from the start, John never ate during the day. And he liturgized in communion every day, and he spent hours in silence at the altar. He would, when he finished, and I got to move because
Yeah,
I'm
the
son of my
sun's here.
eyes. Yeah. He would, when he finished liturgy, he would spend what his deacons and priests were saying is that he never spent less than an hour at the altar in silence when he was done. And he often served barefoot at the altar, which was kind of scary for a lot of people. And some people really objected to that. But he based that off of, you've heard of Saint Moses? Saint Moses was a murderer who ultimately converted to Orthodoxy. And he had a speech impediment, and he didn't have shoes, yet he served. And that's kind of, he had some other statements about serving as well. Like he commented that he wouldn't allow ties on any of the people serving in the back, any of the subdeacons or any of the altar servers, because he said that ties were an upside down noose. You know, just fascinating. Some of the things that the upside down noose, you know, like a noose that you would hang from. Yeah.
It's-
Yeah.
That's how we feel when we wear them sometimes.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I've heard that too, in some traditions where they say it's, and I'm not criticizing your tie, but from the altar server's point of view of having a tie on is an ornament. It's an ornament. It's it's something to glorify your appearance, right? So exactly. And what are all the clergy from readers on, we dress in black. And we dress in black to relinquish the world, to kind of be in as much as possible invisible, although we seem to stand out, but that's not the objective behind it.
Mhm.
That's interesting. 1946, John was elevated to the position as an archbishop, and by the Holy Synod of Bishops of Rocourt, and was be named the Archbishop of China.
What does Repose stand for?
Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. Right. Yeah. So the Russian diaspora.
So this is World War II.
Exactly. World War II. Right. Yep. Some pictures of him with orphans.
Wonder if you got a picture with him with the 3500.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, there's a few, and keep in mind that he had staff. Okay. So it wasn't just him.
And they grew up.
And they grew, right? And everybody, right? And they grew up, right? So. I think it's Tuboa or Tubao, Tubadao, something. I've heard it so many different ways. And this is a long statement, but the bottom line is in 1949, Communist China advanced into Shanghai. The Russian colony had to leave. And so the International Refugee Organization was searching for a place for them to go. The only place that they were allowed to go was into the Philippines, and they put them on this island, which was a deserted island. And so they started evacuating in January of 49. Took them until May to get there, to get everybody out. There were some 5,000 refugees, including 3,500 orphans and a couple thousand other people as well. And they were there for 27 months. St. John arrived just before Pascha in 1949. And so this island apparently would get lots of typhoons. So John would go every day and pray on all the corners of the island while he was there to pray for safety for the people. And then this is the last statement I didn't know until I started digging deeper, was that he in 1940, so July 12th, 1949, he went to Washington, D.C. and he stayed there for some time. And the objective was he was trying to convince the U.S. government to allow the refugees to come to the United States. Many of the I mentioned in Shanghai, there were about 50,000 Russians. Many went back to Russia. Okay? He wanted them to come with him, but many went back to Russia. And of course, we know what happened to so many people in Russia, right? And so he was successful in getting Congress to approve to allow the immigrants the refugees to come to the United States. And some ended up most ended up in San Francisco, which is why, and we'll get to San Francisco in just a minute. But the other thing is that he started this.
The refugees or the orphans?
I'm sorry, the refugees and orphans,
And
because they opened an orphanage in Shanghai as well.
Yeah, okay.
But he founded a Rocourt church while he was in Washington, D.C. And they actually served. My notes are not here, but the Capitol Cathedral.
Yeah.
What do we call it?
National.
The National Cathedral.
Yes.
They served liturgy in the National Cathedral after, of course, just like we had when we had the Africans here,
Yeah.
right? When we were done, they would come in. Right? So it's just fascinating, some of the things that he managed to accomplish. And this is some pictures of him on the island, serving liturgy.
No chairs.
No chairs. And I don't know if this was built during, after, I'm not sure. There's not a lot of, they're just kind of pictures random photos of what's going on there. But they were there 27 months, so it's possible that they,
He
that would be
accomplished
things that they,
that kind of.
You see the Russian influence.
yes, oh yeah, without a doubt, yeah. Okay. So Western Europe, November 27th of 1950, Archbishop John was assigned to serve as Archbishop of the Western European Diocese. His first sees were in Paris and later in Brussels. He supported monasteries and parishes throughout Holland, Belgium, France, and elsewhere. One that's he established in 54, a monastery, the Nativity of St. John, the Baptist in The Hague in Holland, which is a community of female monastics.
Oh,
And then he ends up being moved to San Francisco. At the time, there was lots of conflict going on in San Francisco. They were building this big cathedral.
where's he getting all his money to move around?
They just move them. I mean, the archdiocese, I assume
yeah.
they would move them. Yeah. But my understanding is that there was lots of conflict within the parish, which is a very large, and the parish community. And there was accusations of mishandling of money as they were building this big cathedral. But he managed to reunite the community and get the cathedral finished. And it was accomplished in 1965, and then ultimately became officially sanctified in 1977. He was also slandered. A lot of people didn't like St. John because people liked him, right? And you can imagine it just, we don't think of hierarchs as well, I guess sometimes we recognize that hierarchs have conflicts, right? Or jealousies. And if you think about it, his love and passion for children, and he would get in the way sometimes of some maybe hierarchical norms, right? Because maybe that was somebody else's job or somebody else's duty to do, but yet that was his passion. And he was very simple-minded in his approach. So people really related to that. And I think of our Bishop Anthony, who's a very approachable, easy to understand man, right? And I've encountered some other bishops that maybe are not as approachable, right? And I think that would be one way to maybe look at that. But he ended up actually having to clear his name in court, and he ultimately did. And then
What was he being accused of?
He's accused of mishandling money.
Oh,
So this stuff just continued, right?
Okay,
There's that continuation of angst and anxiety and all these kind of things, right? And I think we all know that church life, it's a bunch of, sinful people that make up the church. So then things happen. That's picture of the cathedral in San Francisco. So he was in Seattle, and on July 2nd, or June 9th, or June 19th, depending on which calendar you're using, he fell asleep in the Lord right after he was done with liturgy. So the story is that he finished liturgy, he spent 3 hours at the altar, and he went upstairs to his room, and they heard a loud noise. The deacon went up and found him on the floor. He picked him up, and he looked at him and died. And they say that they had to get him back to California within 24 hours. They moved him very quickly. And they say that carrying him down the stairs, it was like carrying lead. And this was a man that was probably about 100 pounds at the time. And then when they moved him into the cathedral and into his where he would be buried, or in the coffin, they said it was light as a feather. There's this interesting kinds of mystical things that happen around him, and including that, which I guess I never thought about. They didn't embalm him. Okay? They didn't bury it. They didn't do anything to his body other than to vest him. And he was open in an open coffin for 6 days in the cathedral in San Francisco. The funeral was held, and you can see the date differences, but it's 5 days later, by the hierarchs in the Holy Protection Cathedral. There's a couple different names for the cathedral, but it's the same cathedral that he built. And he ultimately was laid to rest in a crypt below the main altar. There were 3 altars in the cathedral, so they could serve multiple liturgies a day. You know, we can only serve liturgy on the altar once a day, so they would be able to do different services throughout.
By the same prayer by one priest. That is a different priest.
The altar, no, they can't serve it on the same. Yeah, and they would move it right.
That's strange because church and worship.
Yeah.
Priests
Yep.
there.
And they would serve on the same altar.
And
Yeah.
we had 2 liturgies.
Yeah.
One
Mhm.
was like at 7
Yeah.
a.m. and
Yeah.
one was at 10.
Yeah.
But it had to be served by different.
Sure. And my guess is that there are variations from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, much like we and the Antiochians, we celebrate Bright Week, but we continue for 40 days. Okay, which some people would say, oh, that's not Orthodox, right? Because you have 1 week of no fasting, but in the Antiochian tradition, we feast for 40 days.
Oh, so there is no fasting.
Yeah, right. Yes,
It's party time.
That
Party
was
time.
relatively new
Right.
knowledge for all of us.
I know, and I know, and that.
And we're feeling a little guilty all the eating.
Well, and I don't know that that's, for some of us who are addicted to things, that may not be a good idea, right? So, but we're not monastics, so who can say that, right?
Why do you think, and
This is
I
a
don't know
picture of
in
the
your
cathedral.
research, I'm
No,
sorry,
no, you're good. Go ahead. No, please.
if there was any attribution or explanation as to why his body was so heavy initially, I wondered.
That was just an observation that was made, and I think it was this sorrowfulness maybe of him dying, and then the burdens, yeah. And that was really what, the whole history of John is about, taking on all these cares of everybody else. And like every other, like all clergy, right? But he was very, very strict in his approach, because he believed that the liturgical life of the church is first. All right, first and foremost, because in that, and we hear that from Father Michael all the time, right? What should I do, Father, to get closer to God? Come to church. And St. John really is a living example of that. This picture, as best I can tell, was taken from his when he was canonized. And but you can see, and this is inside, and it's just an amazing space. They exhumed his body, they opened up the coffin, okay? And you can find some YouTubes about this as well. They opened up the coffin 25 years, I think it was, after his repose, and found that his body was uncorrupted. So unbelievable, just an amazing thing. So a couple of my comments, just some of my thoughts on St. John. Served liturgy every day. Believed in the liturgical life of the church. That was, a critical point to his all of his theology was based. He found the theology of the church is in the liturgy. Rarely slept, only had a chair, and only a chair was in his room. He cared deeply for orphans. He never stopped praying. During his time in Shanghai, the ladies that were caring for the kids were getting irritated with him, because we keep bringing in all these kids and they had no food. So the one lady confronted him and was very belligerent to him about it. And he looked at her and said, well, what do we need? Or what do you need? And she said, everything. And he turned and he walked away, and he went upstairs, and she said, you could hear him doing prostrations all night long. And to the point that people complained that it was so noisy. And the next day, this woman woke up. She was dozed off at the kitchen table, apparently, and somebody had rung the doorbell. And it was a cereal salesman from a cereal company, and she wanted oatmeal. And he said, I heard you have children here. We have this excess oatmeal. Would you like it? Okay. And then St. John walked down the stairs as they were unloading it, and he looked, and the staff started to approach him, and he just turned and went upstairs and continued to pray. So it's those kind of things that to me are just, you know, how many of you have seen the movie Man of God?
I was just thinking
Right?
about that.
Same.
I was just
Yeah.
thinking about how much his life was like.
Like Saint Victorious.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Have you guys all seen that?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, my hope is that we could do that maybe as a
Film with Father.
film with Father, or even
Film with
with,
Deacon.
or with even just having the men and the women's group get together and have a night of that. It's very, very good.
There's a book out, but it's, the way it's written is kind of hard to follow.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read the book.
I've not read the book. no.
Yeah, I read the book, but it was after I saw the movie, which was
Yeah,
good.
sure.
Because just the way the style of the writing.
Yeah,
was
it's
different.
much easier to watch the movie, I think. He never stopped praying. He spoke and wrote in plain language, which I think is an education for all of us. And he was very humble. I think that's the key thing with him is his humility. A few pictures of him serving,
It's small.
very small. Yeah. This is one of the first ones I saw of him. I thought, this is interesting. You know, who's this guy? Right. Serving. I think my last one the last one, my pictures will. So the one story I read initially, and then this was actually, I saw this in a cartoon kind of fashion. It was but there was a deacon there, and the deacon said, but Holy Father, those children are not Russians, they're Chinese. And he turns to him and says, all children need to be cared for. All children need to be cared for. They're all children of God. And that, so when I was chrismated, I was never given a saint. Don't know why. It just kind of happened. I don't know. And Father challenged me about 5 years ago so well, you need a saint. Go pick one out. That's interesting. And I just literally saw this somewhere and thought, yeah, that's the guy I need to know more about. So that's St. John.
Maximovich, Maxim.
How would you say it?
Mostly.
Yeah, well, I'm calling Maximovich because, you know, I'm white Anglo, right? Although I am Russian. That was the other thing too. I wanted somebody from Russia because my heritage is because I'm Russian, Austrian, and German.
Oh,
There's not a lot of Orthodox saints in that arena. So
thank you.
thank you, everybody.
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you. Yep.
Really appreciate it.
Have a great day, everyone. We'll
I
stop
think it's
the recording.
fascinating why our clergy pick the names they do. I didn't think to explore that.
Not everybody gets the opportunity.
Really?